talking Watchers 2 from 1990. This one is directed by Thierry Knott, who previously brought us a creature feature that you may have seen, The Terror Within It, from a year before this one. And this one stars the Beastmaster himself, yes, Marc Singer, along with Babylon 5 alum Tracy Scoggins. Now, being called Watchers 2, you may expect this to be a sequel to the original Watchers that came out a couple of years before this and starred Corey Haim. Alas, it isn't. It's more or less another kind of re-adaptation of the original Dean Koontz novel, so it kind of follows more or less the same story. Now, I haven't read the Dean Koontz novel, but I understand this version is the closest to that novel, and it focuses on Marc Singer's character Ferguson, who is an escaped military prisoner who kind of ends up running across this golden retriever who, unbeknownst to him at the time, is a genetically enhanced dog with super intelligence. However, this dog is pursued by another genetic experiment, this being the Outsider, this huge kind of hulking mess of a killing machine that has a kind of psychic link to the dog and ultimately wants to kind of kill it. Now, Singer's character Ferguson ends up being helped by a kind of scientist played by Scoggins, who was a kind of animal researcher who worked at the a laboratory before it was overrun by animal activists that caused these things to escape in the first place. And they are both pursued by this creature intent on hunting down this dog and the shady doctor responsible for the whole mess to begin with. Now, what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss what works with this movie. So this one, unlike the original, this one was made as a direct-to-video film, whilst the original was originally conceived as a theatrically released movie. So it is a little bit of a cheaper film in some ways, but I have to say that the main difference here, of course, is you have an adult lead. So the first one focused on Corey Haim's character, who was like a teenager. Here you have a seasoned military vet, Ferguson, played by Singer. So it gives it a slightly kind of more action-orientated dynamic, because Ferguson can obviously kind of handle himself a little bit more than a sort of teenage kid. So this one has a more of a kind of an action feel, but I have to say, in some ways, this one had a little bit more emotional punch, for example, because we were introduced to Ferguson's kind of ex-wife, who he still has a fairly good kind of relationship with. I mean, get a reasonable amount of screen time with her, and she's ended up kind of brutally killed by this kind of creature, and that kind of quite, hit quite hard, because you kind of got to know her a little bit as a kind of a character rather than just randoms that you kind of run across, which I felt was maybe, that had more the first film kind of didn't really have that emotional pathos as much, to a point. There's also a little bit more kind of depth in regards to the facility and what's kind of going on there, and we learn a little bit more about it. And as with the kind of the first movie, this kind of creature, this outsider, there's a hint of kind of humanity there. The first one only really had a barest of hints where it kind of is attracted to, for example, like a teddy bear. And although, again, this movie doesn't really explore that massively, we see a little bit more in this movie. So I like the fact that you got a little bit more kind of sympathy for the kind of the creature in this one compared to maybe the first film. As I mentioned, this one's more an action movie to more than a horror. It's a lot more overt kind of action in this one with the kills and the monster being a lot more kind of visible than maybe the first film. The first film, you really didn't see much of this kind of creature, which kind of hid some of the kind of, quite frankly, kind of wonky VFX. Here it's kind of all out on display, so you get a lot more kind of seeing what's kind of going on, which is both a good and a bad thing, and I'll come on to why it's a bad thing in just a little bit. I think Marc Singer, to be fair, maybe slightly biased. He's always been one of my favourite kind of action heroes, obviously with V and kind of, the Beastmaster and a few other kind of movies as well. So I've always found him quite kind of like a likeable kind of lead kind of character, and there's no difference. I think he's quite a quite a fun and likeable character who seems like a kind of a good bloke. And Tracy Scoggins as well is fairly likeable as the you know, as the kind of the female equivalent. And the dog, just as well, is just as kind of like adorable with this one. And I like to hear the reveal about its intelligence isn't kind of immediately apparent. It's more kind of revealed more and more as the kind of the film goes on. So there are a reasonable amount of death scenes. There's a reasonable amount of kind of gore and stuff like that, and violence. So there you go. So what doesn't work with this movie? Let's start with the creature itself, because I feel sometimes less is more. The first film, you didn't see a lot of the creature, and when you did, you never really got a particularly good look. And the creature design wasn't brilliant in the first movie, but here it kind of looks like you've got someone in a rubber suit that's then been melted. Now I guess you could argue that it's meant to be a genetic mess of a creature, so you could kind of say, yeah, it's meant to look like a little bit of a mess. But it doesn't look particularly strong, I have to say. And I would say, even though I didn't think the first creature looked particularly strong, it looked better than this one. Because it looks just a little bit rubbery. It looks a little bit too kind of like man in a suit rubber, which obviously is what it is, but it looks like that. So the creature itself, I think aesthetically isn't as interesting, although I think they did a little bit more with it, kind of to give it a little bit more personality to a certain degree. This movie is also, the cinematography isn't brilliant. It's a little bit on the dark side in regards to its lighting. No, I don't mean the subject matter, I mean actually dark. It's not Aliens vs Predator Requiem bad, but even so, there are some elements here that are somewhat kind of underlit. I have to say as well, I think this movie started off pretty strong, but it lost momentum in the kind of the second half, which is ironic because that's when you get most of the action. But I feel it just kind of doesn't kind of grasp your interest quite as much. Now maybe it's partly because obviously it's a lower budget movie compared to the original one, but it just seems to be somewhat sort of treading water kind of story wise, and it ends up having a few kind of like action kind of cliches and things like this. So it's a very comparable movie in some ways. If you like the first one, you'll probably like this one. It's maybe a little bit cheesy and more hokey than the first, but I gotta say there are elements that I think do work a little better. But overall, it's a somewhat kind of average kind of creature feature. I had seen this one before, though watching it again, I really didn't remember anything about it, if I'm completely honest. So, you know, it's certainly an okay watch, but I don't think it's memorable really, to be honest. So I'll give this one a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.